Welcome to Lean Stories. I'm Jonathan Bertfield. I'm the CEO at Lean Startup Co. So, this is where we dive deep with practitioners from around the world, talking to them about how they've discovered the transformative power of the Lean Startup methodology. In each of the episodes in this series, you'll hear authentic stories from product leaders and innovators across industries and geographies, how they discovered the Lean Startup principles and the pivotal moments that changed their approach to give them the real world impact of putting customers at the center of everything they build. So, in the notes below, you'll find information about our guest and about getting in touch with Lean Startup Co. In this conversation, we're going to be speaking with Davide Turi. He has deep experience in corporate innovation and entrepreneurship. And we talk about some of the common challenges faced in corporate innovation, including misconceptions about the role of innovators, the misalignment of resources, and something I think is really, really crucial, the importance of strategic focus. I really like Davide's emphasis on a need for a shift in the mindset towards a lean startup approach. And we'll learn about the four key principles as he sees them for driving successful innovation. All right. It's a great pleasure to welcome Davide Turi to Lean Stories. Welcome, Davide.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Maybe let's just start. Just talk about your background a little bit, right? Like you've founded some ventures, you've done some startups, you've worked in corporate for a long time, founded an innovation studio. As you were going through that journey, what was the specific problem, a challenge, maybe a moment with one of those companies or a team that you recognized that there was a problem with corporate innovation, that it was broken and entrepreneurship was maybe part of the answer. Is there a moment in time? Is there a story that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good one. Overall, I haven't met anyone involved in innovation who hasn't been through some sort of pain in their career. So that's absolutely something broken, or perhaps elements that might require some adjustment. I started as an entrepreneur myself. As you said, I founded a few companies, 8 of them so far. But I've been founded my first companies in my teens. Really, it just felt like normal for me to act as an entrepreneur, even if I was working with a large organization. And but at the same time, you immediately realize that the organizations are not really ready to take on board the kind of energy and drive that you would bring on board as an entrepreneur. To me, like probably if I had to say, there are three main elements that perhaps the large organizations may have in common when it comes to innovation not working well as expected or as it should. The main one for me is a misconception about what being an innovator means. So, what it is exactly that an innovation person is expected to do, and is that a technology function, or is this about someone having great ideas? Is it someone creative? And so with that comes, this big question that I keep hearing over and over again. And I keep seeing my clients or the companies I work with somehow having to deal with. So is this something that should sit with the CTO team, or perhaps on business development, or is it more a design function? And so that comes to me, that comes with a misconception about what it is that we are expecting from innovators, really. One of the other points is probably about resourcing. Is something that I'm sure you must have heard from other innovators in the past, especially working with large organizations. Very, very often innovation programs or innovation initiatives in my career have started with a lot of excitement, as is normal, as it should be. And then gradually this excitement is facing challenges or barriers. And some of these very often come from misalignment on resources allocation. So resources or team members are busy with their BAU activities, and meaning they are chasing certain goals that perhaps will go on to define their own bonuses at the end of the year. And while obviously they might be keen on doing something different, perhaps exploring new stuff or creative ideas, at a certain point, there comes a stage where their involvement becomes a problem in terms of them not being able to hit certain goals or complete certain tasks that are part of the reasons why they are in the company. Is always the case at innovators, and personally I met these kind of challenges in the past, and that it comes with some lessons in terms of aligning resources and incentives. There's probably the last point is a misalignment on strategy direction or success criteria. I've seen clients very often not having clarity or not having alignment on what it is that we are trying to do in terms of when we innovate. But then particularly having the capability to define what success looks like. It's something that very often require some form of facilitation, I would say, in terms of processes. And to me, that the risk with that is if leaders are not aligned on what it is that we are trying to achieve and what will define success, very often that translates into a lack of sponsorship, lack of alignment, which eventually, may undermine the overall innovation initiative. So these three main areas, right? So what the role of of innovator is, what it is, what are the skills that will define an innovator, an innovation person, and misalignment on resourcing and misalignment on strategic direction and or success criteria.
What was the moment in that journey where you saw it like blinking red light, like all of these are coming together and they're broken?
Yeah, it's very often, as I said, it starts with a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. When there is misalignment in terms of resourcing, what happens very often is you find yourself stuck or blocked. There are specific tasks that you can't complete. For example, like the go-to-market team being particularly busy chasing the quarterly targets, and there is no way they will let you access to customers or launch marketing campaign that you need to validate an idea. Sales teams being busy with again hitting their targets. There is no way they will make intros or they will participate to calls with you in order to introduce potential clients. And what happens is you find yourself stuck, not being able to get back to the board with the signals related to potential traction of your idea or even evidence of traction, which again undermines the overall process. What also when it comes to strategic direction, that's a tricky one, because when there is lack of alignment within the leadership, I find myself working with stakeholders wouldn't agree on what was exactly the success criteria we were going for, and misalignment there means, oh, I thought you were actually doing these, or actually I would prefer going in this direction, and that's a massive red light, because eventually what happens is you can't please everyone, but at the same time it can be a responsibility of the person delivering innovation programs or delivering innovation initiatives to bring leaders up to speed when it comes to what it is that we are strategically going to do, unless what I've done in the past very often was just pressing the pause button, going back to the board and suggest, look, it seems like there is a problem on misalignment here, or a challenge perhaps. We might want to take a step back, look exactly at what it is that we are trying to achieve, bring everyone on board, and then restart after that. But not solving these challenges very often end up undermining the overall success of the program. So with leaders eventually saying, oh, we are not making any progress, or this is not what I was expecting, meaning they don't know exactly what they were expecting, but they say this is not what they were expecting. So it's extremely important to I realized this by essentially making mistakes. It's extremely important to lay out all these elements from the very beginning and ensure that there are the conditions to deploy a successful program. It must be probably must be noticed that even if you lay out these kind of things at the beginning, there are some risks in the process, and which are very often related to the change of external conditions that may reshuffle priorities or may require sudden focus from a team or from a leader. diverting their efforts away from any promise or innovation support they might have promised in the past. So I mean, we discussed, for example, like when it comes to lack of alignment in terms of resourcing for innovation program or innovation initiative. So it happened in the past for me. I was with a client and it was almost impossible getting access to their customers, and for reasons related to the legal team being busy, but they couldn't approve us legally getting in touch with customers directly, the branding team not approving it or not approving our marketing material or go-to-market material, or even perhaps even more recently, go-to-market team taking too long to approve go-to-market material in order to get evidence about an idea. This up very often I've seen is with go-to-market or technical development team having their own backlog and their own priorities. Anytime this happens, to me, it's a massive red light in terms of there is a requirement here to go up and go up back to the board and highlight not needing the challenge, perhaps suggest proposed solutions. One of the solutions I've been implementing with clients has been creating sandboxes. So, for example, contact with clients is always very often a challenge, and it's one of the first things I would ask to a client before engaging with them. What has worked in the past with some clients is defining boundaries. So defining very clear boundaries of number of customers I can contact, or branding guidelines, or key criteria, terms and conditions, and or perhaps time boxing time from specific resources. This helps because leaders have the visibility of what it is they are committing to, but at the same time they can protect access to customers, and which is eventually what they want. But also at the same time, it enables an innovation project or innovation initiative to continue to the journey of customer validation, which is eventually necessary to bring any evidence in front of the board. And so that's probably an example of resources, misalignment on the access to resources being one of the potential key challenges innovators have to face while delivering innovation propositions.
How you talk about that core idea of a lean startup mindset appropriate to driving innovation.
Having been in innovation functions or leadership positions for 20 years now, what I can say is, thanks to Lean Startup, I believe the approach of leaders and organizations towards innovation has changed for the better. Right? So I can look back 20 years from back and see how leaders and organizations now tend to operate in a more data-centric approach. They will take decisions. I will see leaders taking decisions driven by data, as opposed to this is my gut feeling, this is what I believe because I've been in the industry for 40 years. They will be more customer centric now. It seems like certain cultural elements that are at the foundation, I believe, of Lean Startup somehow, if I feel like they are more integrated into the way leaders and organizations are operating, although there is still a lot of work to do. But the way I will probably engage, and I engage with clients in the past when it comes to instilling a certain mindset, what I've been doing is distilling what I believe were the key messages of Lean Startup into 4 key principles. Obviously, I mean, you don't want to sit there in a lecture and say, this is what the entrepreneurship or a disciplined entrepreneurship approach looks like. But if I had to condense the 4 key principles that I will normally explain and engage with stakeholders, will probably be these 4. So the first one is probably the most unpopular, and it's about not falling in love with your first idea. To me, it's an important one because it somehow is it's including the pivot concept, but in a way that you don't have to introduce what pivot means. But at the same time, I find it's powerful because it helps demystify what normally is the the concept, the key concept behind what is perceived to be entrepreneurship and innovation. Having a great idea, jumping across any obstacle you may find in order to get that idea delivered. Go in there and say it's not about your first idea. To me, helps us break that barrier and make it clear that an idea is a starting point. Is a starting point for embarking on a journey of discovery and giving yourself the opportunity to prove your idea was right or wrong, and potentially pivot into a new one. The second point that I like to make a lot, and mostly because I've seen a lot of corporate guys doing it, is not falling into the build trap, right? So not start with development or not start with a multi-billion budget onto an initiative just because, right? And I've seen this in the past, unfortunately, particularly I would say probably at the beginning of my career, companies, clients embarking on huge projects just based on an hunch from a leader, right? Who because they could just command certain decisions or move certain budget or resources around, they would just go and do it. And it's weird because as a person involved in these kind of projects, at a certain point, you start getting the feeling that you are not necessarily going in the right direction. But at the same time, you don't want to voice your concern because you don't want to be the person being perceived as a negative one. Um, but certainly not falling into the build trap has been probably my second key principle that I always try to bring forward. What I've seen clients in the past where their expectation was, okay, so you launch, right? It's done, right? This must be the product, right? And it's the concept of iterating by itself also is something that is not particularly familiar with leaders who haven't been close to innovation in the past. So there is a core belief that once it's done, it's done. While we all know that it takes proper time to achieve what you would expect as a product market fit. So again, not falling into the build trap, I believe, is quite important because it brings up the idea of validation, but also somehow it helps introduce what is the third principle I would normally explain to students or leaders alike when we are engaging related to mindset, which is increasing commitment alongside certainty, right, and evidence. And so the way I structured innovation programs or perhaps corporate venture capitals in the past was somehow mimicking the startup founding process and plugging that startup funding process with a funnel of innovation ideas or innovation propositions. So ensuring that there is a precise range of money or funds being released at each stage in exchange of evidence being delivered by the teams involved. And to me, again, this is key because it helps leaders understand that they are not, this is not one of those bets when you are putting all your money on the red at the roulette. It's not about risking everything, but it's about metering your risks based on the evidence you are capturing in the field and potentially, not being worried or too concerned about killing an idea, which is always an extremely unpopular thing to do. I remember members in the past when I had to make a recommendation about killing an idea. And I remember like spending an hour with the chairman, just going through all the questions. It's like, are you sure? I mean, are you sure we really want to kill this idea? And no, my point was, I mean, look, we got so many others in the pipeline. It's much better if we, spend energies and money now to validate others. I'm not saying we are killing. Maybe we are pivoting, we are iterating it. But this one, right, the one you are in love with, I'm afraid it's not going to work right now. And but again, so increasing commitment, having a staged and metered approach for funding, even without organization, it really helps leaders decrease the sense of risk, right? And let them perceive that they are only going to invest as much as required or suggested by the evidence that we are delivering as innovators. And then
What is,
just to conclude, yeah, yes, go ahead.
just before you get into number four, one of the bigger challenges that I see, so the concept of meter funding, right? We're going to release based on commitment, as you're describing. One of the kind of maybe more subtle implications of that is that if we don't have the traction, we're not going to release the funding. That's in many ways is harder for leaders to get their heads around, right? Because they've already spent the money in their minds, right? It's already like when we're looking ahead over the next 12 months, we're going to spend that money, right? And then we come along and say, well, actually, we're only going to spend that money if we see the traction appropriate for committing further, right? So there's a give and take there, right? Yes, it's a disciplined approach to releasing funds, but it's also a disciplined approach to turning off funds when it's not appropriate.
Which is troubling. It's troubling because it doesn't fit well with with plans, like so financial plans, for example, financial forecast, where obviously as a leader you will have to post what is your objective, what is your goal in terms of contribution to EBITDA or revenue by the end of the year. And obviously, I would probably count all the contribution that I did from different projects, but then how come that you want to kill one of them? What happens to my goal, right? What happens to my target? And this is why I believe it's important in innovation function to embrace a concept of portfolio, right? So you don't want to spread you want to put all the eggs in one basket. You want to spread your bets somehow, and not only in terms of perhaps targeting different segments or targeting different technologies, but at the same time spreading the innovation proposition across a portfolio and across a number at different horizons, right? And so this is for me that is the fourth key principle, like embrace a portfolio approach, and it helps in two ways. One is it, it makes it easier to kill ideas, knowing that we have a pipeline, we got more. But then secondly, working across horizons also, I believe it helps particularly at the beginning of at start of an innovation project where you want to be able to demonstrate early impact. And so you may want to choose horizons that are closest, perhaps on horizon one, that you are demonstrating, you are generating an immediate impact on the company P&L, or like improving processes, or onboarding more customers. And then you use that evidence, right, in order to secure additional funding or expand the horizons beyond horizon one and horizon two. And again, it's about applying the metered funding approach, but onto an innovation project management, and at the same time providing leaders with some leeway in case they want to change tack. Some projects have to be canceled because of lack of traction.
So I love the way those principles, they start very much with the individual idea, like don't fall in love with the first idea. Then as we're moving forward and we're thinking about building, but the don't fall into the build trap is a great way of kind of disciplining that journey towards starting to create something. And then we get into, how are we going to fund the initiatives that do get built and do start to emerge. And then we're like really at the big picture perspective, and we're thinking about the overall portfolio and all of the different products that are in motion and potentially going to market. That's a really powerful construct. It's a lot, right? It's a lot to take on board. What has been kind of let's start with the positive. Like, what's been the best experience where you've seen an organization like embrace all of those, like really see it all the way through? Because um, you can't build an organization that is really delivering against customer-centric goals and delivering against that strategic intent if you don't do all of those things, I would say. So what's your best example where you saw that happen across all of those four?
The situations where I enjoy the most working with the client and this principle overall is I've been establishing and then interim managing a corporate venture capital focused on the energy and transition, and the raw materials that are crucial for the energy transition. And the reason why I felt like these principles were working well is because they help me engage a different level of the organization. So at a board level, also CEO and chairman of the board and C-suite. The idea of having a metered approach to funding really resonated well, particularly with the financial, from a financial perspective. So usually the board has in the past had perceived innovation as something expensive that wouldn't deliver the results that eventually they were expecting. So there is a bit of an innovation scare, right? So going there saying, don't worry, look, I'm not going to ask for 15 millions right now on the spot. Let's start with something small first, right? And let's use this money to capture ideas from across the business, validate the key challenges, and then start with a process where I will come back to you and ask for more money only if. Right? And so that really worked well. The concept of a portfolio also, it's a bit technical, so it's important that you to simplify it. You don't want to start talking H1, H2, H3. People won't get it. But more than that is about, it's probably something that you wouldn't want to communicate too much to at board level, but it's probably more a principle in terms of prioritizing activities. So what do I do first? I do first whatever is helping me to get back to the board in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time, with some early results and some early impact, regardless of its size. Right? It's important to show that we haven't been spending our time just doing research, but look, we already generated this result. And in the meanwhile, there are a number of other activities in the pipeline that we are currently exploring, and this is the progress. The principle related to not falling in love with your first idea and not falling into the build trap, I've seen them being very helpful, particularly when operating closer to the front line. So developers, if they love an idea, you probably find them working on that after you end the meeting, which is great because it shows a lot of passion, it shows a lot of engagement, but at the same time, what's the best way to engage at them delivering what is really needed when it's needed. So it really helps demystify, as I said, some of the key mythology around entrepreneurship and innovation, but at the same time, it helps explaining why we've been working on something and now it's completely different, or why you keep changing it, right? I keep changing it because I require customer validation and I don't fall in love with with my first idea. So as you said, it really helps having this principle very easy to communicate, but at the same time, they help you have internal conversations across the entire spectrum. And perhaps starting with the element related to metered funding is probably the most powerful one I've seen in the past. Again, because there is an innovation scare that very often is undermining future innovation activities.
Yeah, it's somewhat counterintuitive, but I think that very often in a large organization, the CFO becomes one of the greatest advocates for the principles that you're describing, because their goal is to manage risk. And the entire approach of lean startup and those principles that you mentioned, they're designed to avoid wasting money on bad ideas, right? Ideas that customers don't want, even if they're the first idea, right? Even if you start building it straight away, like we want to avoid those things because they expose us to a lot of risk, and the finance side of the business, they embrace that once they understand it. So finding the right language to get them to recognize that this is a powerful asset for the work that they're trying to do, that's really crucial.
It is. Probably there are two extremes. One is the extreme where in certain situations companies may find themselves in a condition where they have to invest. So because they make commitments, it happened in the past where my clients, they made commitments with the board, investing a certain amount of money in innovation or in new projects. And so the idea of not being able to deploy these funds is somehow not resonating with the CFO because why are we talking about? I have to spend this money. The other extreme is where The metered funding approach is taken to the extreme, right? Where it's hyper over engineered. And it happened in the past where I took over from previous consultants, where I don't know, somehow they justified over engineering the innovation process, where each interactions was strictly defined and by a set of rules, and certain criteria will have to be met in order to progress an idea to the next stage. And then the reason why I jumped in is because they had to put the entire program on hold, simply because at a certain point they had innovation initiatives that weren't fitting into this criteria, right? And I believe this is interesting because there is a desire somehow to control the uncertainty, which is implicit in any innovation projects. If you wouldn't be doing something new if it wasn't uncertain. And sometimes leaders may find themselves in a safe place if they overstructure the rules. Right? Okay, so we know exactly what is going to happen. There are clear processes, there are clear procedures. But then what happens is constantly there is that idea, that proposition, which is not falling into the rules and to the processes. So what do we do with that? So there is a balance that needs to be struck, and this has been one of my engagement with a client is not necessarily watering down the rules of engagement, but ensuring there are some guidelines, but at the same time there is a process which is designed to take into consideration the uncertainty of an innovation development.
I've heard many times actually people say, well, you can't possibly innovate within a structure, right? You can't possibly innovate within a framework. You need freedom to be creative. What I'm hearing from you there is say, and I believe this, so tell me if we're aligned here, that it's actually because of constraints that innovation can really flourish, because we don't spend all of the time kind of wandering around hoping that we're innovating in the right place. And so giving those leaders a sense of confidence that the teams are operating, even if they're doing a little crazy stuff and they're stopping, they're starting, they're doing it within the guardrails that they understand.
Freedom to innovate, that's a risky one. So, the freedom is fine, but within certain boundaries, right? So that there are stages in the innovation process where you totally need full freedom, right? Perhaps ideation, right? Or when you are going broad in terms of like double diamond, just going broad and see what we come up with. Yes, we want to encourage freedom. There are techniques that you apply in workshops and facilitation to ensure that people are just going wild. But at the same time, I don't believe, as I said, over engineering a process. It's helpful for delivering. You will always find that crazy idea. It doesn't fit the process. But defining an high level structure gives team members and leaders alike, provides them with visibility about where we are, what it is that I should see, what it is that I should work for. It provides a certain linearity and some form of structure into what would be otherwise a very messy situation. And so it's about kind of, to me, like the balance is about embracing this uncertainty, but trying to funnel this otherwise potentially destructive energy into a productive funnel where eventually there are clear expectations. They are not too strict, but at the same time, there is clarity at the top and at the bottom on the expectations and what it is that it has to be delivered.
Let's just step away from the corporate side, right? So when you're working with entrepreneurs, when you're teaching, when you're mentoring and doing other work with startups, what do you see as the mindset of new entrepreneurs who are coming into a place that they're really just starting their journey? It's their first startup. It's their first venture that isn't, a real job, right? Like, what do you see emerging as a mindset from a cultural perspective? Like, are they charging ahead? Are they cautious? Are they needing guidance? Like, what do you see the dynamics of the people who are coming through those programs?
Um, Overall, working with young entrepreneurs is extremely rewarding. The kind of energy I receive from the students I engage with at Imperial, or young entrepreneurs and incubators, accelerators, is always something that is extremely is recharging. I get back more than what I give, and which is always a positive balance. To me, um, what I what I don't see enough, right? That's what I want to talk about. Is, if that's okay with you, is the the awareness that eventually, if you had to define entrepreneurship with just one task, right? What it is, the single thing that you are expected to do as an entrepreneur is sale, right? So you as an entrepreneur, you are going to find yourself selling all the time, right? Any conversation that you are going to have, whether it's with an investor, with an advisor, with a team member, with a partner, with a customer, you are always selling. And I don't believe this is something that entrepreneurs realize soon enough. And I take it on me every time I engage with young entrepreneurs. Ultimately, what it is, there are two key rules. One is your job is selling, and you only have one king, which is your cash flow, right? So it's very easy. How do you manage a company? You sell and you keep track of your cash, right? Then obviously you are going to do a lot of other things, but then these are the two key jobs that will define your success and your survival, crucially. And somehow, when I have this conversation with students, particularly, I see very often they can be kind of disillusioned. It's like, oh, come on, it can't be about this. It can't be about selling. But because obviously they see the job of a salesperson as something that somehow is not aligned to the kind of aspiration they had as an entrepreneur. And I hate to be there and bring in the bad news. But eventually, in my experience, what I've seen as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, is you're just selling all the time, and that's the job. If I had to say what it is you're doing, you're just selling.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I think it really is. First of all, it's a skill, right? To be able to sell, to be able to talk about your idea, to be able to talk about your product in a way that isn't just expressing your enthusiasm, but it's tapping into your potential customers, right? And trying to understand whether they are as enthusiastic as you are.
Yeah, yes, indeed, indeed. And then eventually, you as an entrepreneur, as a founder, your responsibility is to bring money on the table, right? You want to bring money in the bank, being able to pay your employees, being able to pay your suppliers, respond to your leader, which is the cash flow. And so again, that's why, eventually, as a responsibility, it's about being in charge of sales primarily.
Awesome. Davide, that's a great way to finish. So I love the four principles that you grounded us on, and I love that finish of always remember that it's about selling and it's about cash flow. It's great. All right. Thanks for your time, Davide. Great chatting with you. Thank you for joining us for this lean story. If this conversation aligns with your challenges that you're seeing in your organization, whether around innovation, scaling, or the specific cultural change that we've been talking about, I'd be happy to have that conversation. So we offer complimentary 20-minute sessions to learn how lean principles can drive measurable impact within your business. You can schedule a time with me or our team using the link below. I really look forward to connecting.